and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors.
Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm so happy that you could join us today. In the age of social distancing now and everything is virtual, we're bringing you the show virtually from my home. And this is a wonderful day to be doing this because we're going to give you a little bit of a diversion today from what we've been talking about. But if you're a caregiver and you're a family caregiver and you're looking for help and you're looking for advice and things to help you with the challenges of caregiving, especially now that you're home and perhaps your loved one you're caring for is also home, or even if they're not home and they're in a community, a facility, a nursing home, there are things that you can do, and we're going to be talking about those things as we shelter in place. The show is every week, continues to be 6 p.m. every Tuesday, and you can also hear us live on Southeast Florida Radio, 96.9, 95.3, and 103.9. Those are all FM channels. Or you can listen to us on the iHeartRadio app under WNN. So share the show. Let others know that we're still here for you. Today we're going to be talking about something different. Let's talk about sex. And I mean that seriously. Yes, it's a diversion from what we've been talking about with the pandemic and all that going along. But actually, sex is a very important topic when it comes to family caregiving. Sex is something that usually isn't talked about quite very much when you're talking about caregiving, and especially with a spouse that you're caring for that has some form of dementia, because it can become an issue. And so I think it's really important to talk about that, and why not. And so I have a very qualified expert in the field of that and so much more with us today. And I'm going to bring her on. She's going to be joining me from her home office in the Boca Raton area. And her name is Elise November. Elise November, she is a licensed clinical social worker. She is the founder and director of her company called Different Like Me. I love that name. And she's with us today. And I set you up today, Elise, because we're already told everyone we're going to be talking about sex. But thank you. Thank you for being here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so super excited to be here and to be able to share information with people. And since we're all kind of stuck in, it's great to be able to learn a little bit while we're in, and just, I always say, be a little bit better tomorrow than we are today, right?
That's right. And so, something that I want to talk about with you, because you have a practice and your therapy, you do therapy. We're going to talk a little bit more later about everything that you do in Different Like Me. But one of the things that we need to talk about, I think it's important because we are staying in, because we are together in tighter quarters. We can't distance ourselves too much when we're all in the same household. And caregivers that are caring for a spouse, it's really difficult, especially now that there aren't other distractions. So one of the topics that I think is important to discuss is sex, especially when it comes to dealing with it in abnormal circumstances with someone with dementia. And of course, there's other abnormal situations too in communities and nursing homes and facilities. And so we'll get into that. But one of the things that you do discuss in your practice is this topic. And is it a topic that comes up very often when you're talking with caregivers?
So I don't think it comes up often, but I try to bring it up, and usually not in the first session or two, because I think it's an uncomfortable topic. I think we're a society that doesn't really talk much about sex. We don't, I mean, I think my earliest memory of like sex was, like going to see a movie and my father like putting his hands over my eyes when like a sex-ish scene came up. And so what do we learn as children is, you know, don't talk about it. This isn't something that you should be looking at. And so you think about it, what messages to parents give children, and how do we grow up in our society thinking about sex? So your initial question to me of, do I talk about it? I do talk about it. But I wait, and I wait till we develop a rapport and develop trust. But it is an issue that I find that when I bring it up, people are kind of almost relieved that I give them permission to talk about it. So I am also the reason I guess this topic is so uh, um, interesting to me. Also, I'm back in school for my PhD. I'm not sure what I call myself, PhD candidate. I'm doing my doctoral dissertation on sex and dementia. And, do professionals ask questions about this, like you just asked me? And the research that I'm finding is professionals do not ask. So doctors, nurses, people who are looking to enter a facility, they don't always ask these questions because we're not a society that's usually comfortable talking about sex. Sometimes, though, and I just will add, sometimes people come because they're dealing with issues related to sex specifically. So if we have more of a frontal lobe presentation with lack of inhibition, with people exposing themselves in public, I've had situations where we had somebody with a frontal lobe who was out dating, who was actually out dating. They were well enough to date, but the presentation was this lack of judgment and lack of inhibition. And so they were not propositioning, they were doing online dating. And this was a person who was happily married prior to that, never had any issues with infidelity. So sometimes somebody will come to me because the initial presentation is of a sexual nature, and sometimes they'll come to me just because they're having issues. And this is just one of the topics we'll kind of talk about a little bit later on. So thanks.
Well, thank you for that. And this is exciting that it's your topic for your PhD. So we'll give you a little more practice here talking about it. I know a few years ago I came across a caregiver and I was talking to her and she was confiding in me really about her husband at home, and she eventually wanted him to go to an assisted living, and we were talking about that. But one of the things I'll never forget that she said to me, she said, there's something with my husband now that he has dementia. And she said, at first I thought it was a good thing. And she says, but now it's driving me crazy. And she said, we have sex like we always did, but because of his dementia, he forgets that we just had it. And then he wants it over and over and over again. And she said, so at first she said that was kind of nice, but she says now it's terrible. And I find myself hiding from him and trying to avoid it. What do I do? So if I were your client, how would you address that?
So two ways. I don't do medication, but sometimes there's a need for medication because it can't just be managed behaviorally, which I'll kind of talk about how to manage it behaviorally. But sometimes you can't because sometimes there's a hypersexuality attached to the disorder, and that's just the presentation of it. And so there's, he's forgetting, but he's also just continually aroused and acting out and inappropriate with it just because of the nature of the disease and its presentation. So sometimes there are certain medications that could be used to, I guess, inhibit, libido, the urge. And so it could be managed that way. So I would always talk to a doctor because it can't always be managed behaviorally. But when we do talk about managing it behaviorally, we talk about more redirecting. We talk about other ways to be intimate. So when the husband or the wife is wanting to have sex, you could redirect it and say, how about a hug? I love you so much. So sometimes they're wanting to have sex because they're needing to connect and they're feeling disconnected, and a lot of people use intimacy to connect with one another. So sometimes anxiety or feeling disconnected, feeling out of control can cause somebody also, it doesn't have to only be about the hypersexuality part, but that might be their way of needing to connect. So we want to work on developing healthy forms of intimacy that may not involve sex. So like I said, let's go have sex. So we want to redirect and say something like, I would love to do that with you later when we go to bed. Right now, what I would love so much is a hug. How about we just hug? How about we just hold hands? How about we just sit on the couch and talk to each other about how much we love each other, or let me tell you about a memory that I have of you. So finding different ways to connect and be intimate with one another I find is helpful. It's hard when it happens over and over again. That might be a time to get some help in to kind of distance yourself from your spouse, or, sometimes even placement is helpful if it, just gets to be too much. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I know that there's a need, people, they want that physical connection. And I know that in communities, we're going to be talking about that right after our break, but in communities, people still are seeking that, and if they don't get enough appropriate physical connection, then it's going to cause other issues. But we're going to talk about that and much more. We come back from our quick commercial break, so stay with us.
Arden Court, a place to live. It's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back to CareGiver Solutions Info Show. My guest today is Elise November. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She is the founder and director of the company Different Like Me, and they do a lot of counseling and therapy with people. And today we're talking about sex and dementia. And before commercial break, Elise, we were talking about what someone can do at home to provide that intimacy that's so needed without, I guess, getting burdened down with the actual act of sex if both parties don't want to, which sometimes it can be really hard to manage that at home when one of the spouses has dementia and keeps forgetting that he just had sex and wants it more and more. So I appreciate those tips. Those are really good. However, what about when a person goes into a memory care community because they have dementia and they're not with their wife anymore, but they're still seeking that connectedness, that physical contact. I know a lot of communities are great about giving hugs and words of loving words, but sometimes a resident will hook up, if you will, with a girlfriend or a boyfriend. And that has a traumatic effect on the well spouse who's home when they walk into the facility or the assisted living or the nursing home and see their loved one holding hands or kissing another person, literally a stranger. That is really, really hard for a lot of caregivers to accept. And what can we say about that to kind of manage that situation?
So I'm not sure it's managing as much as it is adjusting. Um, so there are so many cases out there that I've studied regarding facility care and what they call, I guess, hooking up. But there's two sides of it. Okay, so there's in a facility, and I guess what they call, somebody hooking up with somebody in a facility. So let's say we have a case where somebody is married and their spouse places them in a facility, and they go to the facility, you know, 2 months later, 3 months later, and let's say it's a gentleman that was placed, let's call him Mr. B. And Mrs. B goes to the facility Monday morning, like she always does, and she sees Mr. B holding Mrs. C's hand. And how do you emotionally deal with that? And I work with this a lot. I don't want to say a lot, but it does happen, and it happens often enough with my caregivers. I get a variety of responses. Some are saying, I'm okay with it, and some are saying, I am not. Um, and so, what's the difference? And I'm not sure it's a difference. I think it's a natural human response to be jealous. And there's so many different emotions that come up for people. Anger is usually one of them. I've done this, I've taken care of you, and this is what I get, and you're going to do this. And there's jealousy. So sometimes it depends on what was the relationship like prior to coming in. And that helps people sometimes to deal with it better, but not always. Um, it's about looking at the person and saying they are not the same person that they were. And I think it's very hard for people to grasp that because in the flesh, they still look the same. And many times, in many ways, they act the same. So how could they do this to me, or how could they do this to our relationship? And what I help people to kind of come to, the end is they're not doing it to you, and they're not doing it to your relationship, because if they didn't have this disease, the likelihood is as this wouldn't happen. And if it did, it would be for a different reason. So we talk about your husband or wife just needing intimacy and needing to connect, needing to feel connected to another human being. And we try to look at it more from the outside of, and I pose this question to them a lot is, what would you want if it was you? So I always say you can't have empathy unless you could put yourself in the shoes of the other person. And so we say, okay, if you were Mr. B sitting in that chair and it was you, how would you want your spouse to feel about that? Would you want them to feel like you didn't love them anymore? Would you want them to feel like you were cheating on them? Like, what would you want? Well, if you could pop out of your memory disorder for a moment, what would you say? And most people would say, I love you. I'm not doing this to hurt you, and this is not about our relationship. This is about the fact that I don't remember you and I don't remember our relationship, not because I don't want to, but because the disease has taken that ability away from me. And I do still love you. And given the choice, I would never do this to hurt you. I am doing it because I don't know that I am hurting you, and I don't know. So I try to, as best as I can, just help people to kind of be in those shoes, and there's another side of it, which is how would it feel if it was you sitting in that chair, and what would you say? And then I also turn it around to, if they were well, what would they say? And so we just try to really gain perspective on the situation so it doesn't become a cheating situation, an infidelity situation, which brings up just anger, rage, just horrible feelings. And so we try to pull it away from that, and we turn it towards love. How could you love the person, and how could we work towards acceptance of the situation as opposed to those horrible feelings? And you almost have to take those feelings and we put them in a container. And so that, because they don't serve a purpose, they're based upon a past relationship, not a current relationship. So we take that anger and that horrible feeling, if anybody's ever been cheated on, it's a crappy feeling. It's just it feels really bad. And we put it in a container, and then we try to just look at the person and say, I love them. And how are they doing in this relationship? Let me not look at it as jealousy, as being jealous, but let me look at it and just say, I love them. Are they smiling again where they weren't before? Do they seem happy? And just trying to come to terms with it and come to some level of acceptance. There's been many cases where, lawsuits ensue in different facilities, in my research where, does a facility allow somebody to what they call take up with another person? And, the question is, how do you really stop it? And why should you? If the person is okay and seems like they're consenting, because there's always the issue of capacity, but capacity, what does capacity look like when somebody has memory disorder? And if somebody doesn't seem like they're in distress, are they consenting? And there's many different versions and many different ideas of, what's okay and what's not okay. Many times also it's the judgment of the family. How could you? Or a judgment of a friend. So how could you let them do this? Oh my God, why would the facility allow this? And it clouds a person's ability to come to that level of acceptance. So we also need to put the idea of those people in the container too, because it doesn't really serve a purpose. So.
Well, I've had both sides of the coin when it comes to caregivers. The one who didn't like it when his wife took up with somebody else and just would always cry and get upset and become very, very jealous. On the other hand, I've also had a female caregiver, a wife, tell me, oh, well, he found another girlfriend. That's great. I'm happy that he found somebody that he can, hold hands with, and somebody that he can sit with and just talk. And it doesn't have to be me because I can't do it 24/7. And as long as he's happy, I'm happy. So I've seen both sides of the coin, which leads me to another question, and we're probably going to have to answer when we come back from our commercial break. But the question I'm going to set you up with is, when a spouse has someone in a memory care living in a community, and they're okay with maybe their spouse having a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or even if they don't, they're living their life. They are continuing to live their life. They're still visiting their loved one, but they start dating. And I think that's another whole issue with, again, two sides of the coin. So when we come back, we're going to talk to Elise November about that issue and more. So we'll be right back after this commercial break.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
At this time, I'd like to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Communities. Arden Courts has about 50 memory care assisted livings throughout the United States, 10 of them here in the state of Florida. Arden Courts is a leader in the field of memory care, caring for people with different forms of dementia, and they're also a great resource. And today they'd like to give you this book. It's called the 36-Hour Day Book. It's a wonderful resource for family caregivers. It is written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Mace, and it is full of tips and explanations, definitions, scenarios that you can use as you travel down your journey of caregiving. All you have to do to get this free book is call the toll-free number, which is 888-478-2410. Again, 888-478-2410. Tell them that you heard about this offer on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show. They'll get your name and your address and mail a book to you. It's a great offer, a great resource. So call today and get your book and use it, especially during this time where we're all staying at home, can't go anywhere. Hopefully you have a little bit more time to read. And you can read it either cover to cover or by topic or chapter, whatever works for you. So call it today, 888-478-2410, and get your book, The 36-Hour Day. You'll be glad that you did. So my guest today is Elise November. Elise is a licensed clinical social worker. She's also the founder and director of Different Like Me, which is a company that provides therapy, counseling, and much more to people. And she's also a Florida Supreme Court family mediator. I wanted to mention that because she has other designations too. So she is working on her PhD, and she has taken the time to join us today on the show from her home office in the Boca Raton area. And we are glad that you are here. I also want to mention to everybody, you have two offices, and when we don't have to stay in place and stay home, you can visit her and make appointments for her two different offices, the Delray area and the Boca Raton area. Also, one of the things I want to mention is because we're doing this show virtually and everything is becoming that way and over the telephone, over the internet, Elise, you also do phone counseling, do you not?
We do. We do telehealth. So that could be, typically it's defined as video conferencing. So we do that over the phone. People have smartphones. If they don't, we figure out a way, or over the computer. And it's kind of is just like this, where we're sitting and talking to one another. It's no stress. We kind of keep it easy and simple. There's no major commitment to engaging counseling. It's just, listen, sometimes life just gets hard. And you just need somebody to talk to, and not a friend, not what we call shadow advisors, right? Or shadow support, because those people don't have to live with your decisions, you do. And what a therapist will do is kind of help you to figure out you and what you need to do and what's best for you. And you figure it out along as a therapist kind of facilitates that for you. So yeah, and telehealth is great. We're using it successfully. Everybody that was super resistant to begin with is now on board. So yeah, and we're loving it, We get to see each other's house a little bit. Sometimes somebody will hear my dog or my kids walk by, and, I get the same for them. They'll show me different things they have in their house. So it's kind of cool. I like it. Yeah, thank you.
And that's what we're doing today, so you and I can still be together as planned. When we planned this date, we had no idea we'd be doing it this way, but I'm glad that we can. But back to the question before last break. When a spouse who has an ill spouse in a facility decides that they want to date, they want to go out, they want to live their life, they're still married, and that's what they decide to do. But there are people, especially maybe some family members, that would not agree and really make them feel guilty or give them a hard time. And this is a dilemma, I think, with a lot of caregivers, especially even younger ones who have a spouse who has like early onset Alzheimer's, and it goes very rapidly, and the person's really on the younger side, but their dementia is really at a later stage. Those are really hard times. I've had caregivers say, I'm young, I don't want to waste the rest of my life. I have a problem with this, or my daughter has a problem with this. What can we say to those people?
So yeah, so I think what you're talking about is, should I date? Is it okay to date? So whether you're placing somebody in a facility or you're keeping them at home, is it okay to have, I guess what we would call an extramarital if you're married, or some sort of an affair? And, is it an affair? And, some people say I would never date again. I've had people who said I would never date, I would not do this, and shunned it all throughout our sessions over the years, and then ended up doing it. And I have others that don't. So when you ask about family, let's just kind of like define what it is. So I think what we're talking about is when you have a spouse with dementia, is it okay to date? And I don't know, who's the boss? You are. You're the boss of your own life. Okay, so judgment, I think, is what kind of came up next, which is what will people think? And I think if you're okay with it, and it's all with it, who cares? So let's figure out how to do that and how to do it in a healthy way. Let's just first all decide this is your life. And I'm not advocating that anybody have an extramarital affair, but is it okay? So you've been caring for somebody for years. They may or may not know who you are. They may or may not know your name anymore. Maybe you've placed them, or maybe they're home. So let's take a situation where we've placed somebody in a facility and you get together. It's maybe a female who's placed in a facility, and you get together. You're a male, and you get together because you have a friend who's single, who has been a long time family friend of yours, and you just on a regular basis go out for dinner. And for some reason that you go out for dinner last Friday and it feels a little different than it has in the past, and you question, should I pursue this? Should I not? Is it okay? What are these feelings that I have? And you start to feel guilty, and you start to question, like, what should I do? But at the same time, it also feels exciting because you haven't felt this way in a long time. And life has been really hard and challenging for a long time. And you've lost connection with your wife. You've lost the ability to have an intimate relationship the way you did in the past, whether it's sexual or just, an emotional relationship with somebody. So this kind of feels good. And you don't talk to anybody about it. And you don't tell anybody about it because who are you going to tell? Who are you going to tell? And this goes back to the beginning is it okay to talk about these things? And as professionals, we need to make it okay to talk about it because this is real and this is real life. So let's go back to our gentleman who's out to dinner with this longtime friend. So what does he do? Do you pursue it or not? Well, and who do you talk to about it? And potentially this is where a therapist comes in, is somebody just to talk it out so you can figure it out. What I say is if it feels right, if it feels okay, just go out again. See how you feel. Think about it. Talk to somebody. Who are you going to talk to? So let's talk about that, because if you talk to a friend, it's going to probably go all over the neighborhood, right? Unless maybe it's somebody that could keep your confidence. If you talk to a child, it probably will take on a new meaning because the child's not going to experience it from your perspective. They're going to experience it potentially as a dad, you're cheating on mom kind of thing. How could you do this? You've been married for 50 years, 60 years, whatever the case may be. And how can you do this? So that's a really good question, Marcia, because I think a lot of people suffer in silence and they don't know who to talk to and they don't know what to do. And a lot of people feel like they're doing something wrong. And I don't think you are. I think if it feels okay, then you go for it. And how do you deal with the guilt? How do you deal? A lot of people describe what they call a weirdness about it. It's just weird. I go and visit my spouse in the facility and I'm holding her hand and she's smiling and she's singing songs with me and we're looking at pictures of the kids. And then I go home to my girlfriend. Like, how do I do this and how does that? And it's very confusing for the mind because for most of us, we're a monogamous kind of, society. And they're not used to that kind of experience. And so, we just say we work on just going through that and accepting the process and the feelings for what they are. They're not something that need to be fixed or transformed, just understanding them, accepting them, and going with them. And if something ever doesn't feel right, then stop and don't do it.
It's almost like they have a double life, or they feel like they have a double life, and trying to balance. But the caregivers that I know that have decided to date, they're very loving and devoted spouses to their spouse in the memory care or the assisted living or the nursing home, and they're very devoted, and they're still a caregiver. They're still doing what they need to do and making decisions and making sure that their spouse is taken care of. So I think when they do that, I think it alleviates maybe some guilt that they might have, than feeling like, well, I didn't abandon them.
And that's a really good point that you bring up. And it's not about being a good spouse or a bad spouse. You are a good spouse or you are a good caregiver. You are there, you're there for them. And what I find that my caregivers tell me, and when we talk about it, is that it doesn't diminish the way that they feel about the person, their spouse or their loved one. It doesn't diminish. And then sometimes it even enhances, because what happens is we're giving the caregiver permission to kind of be happy again. And that's, twofold, because sometimes people feel guilty about feeling happy again. But I always say, what would your spouse want you to do? And most times they would say they would be okay with me doing this. But and the other side of it is uh, sometimes we have caregivers with now this new girlfriend or boyfriend, another person in their life, and sometimes together as a joint couple, they will care for the spouse in the community. I've seen that happen. And sometimes the the spouse can't go, and the girlfriend or boyfriend will go and visit. And it's really a love. It should become a love relationship. It's we have to take the traditional views on marriage and vows and transform them with a dementia twist. And when you can do that, you can drop some of that guilt, and you could drop some of the anger if it's being done to you, because we have to look at it in a different context. And so it's important to just help somebody transition to be able to see it with those eyes in a different way.
Absolutely. I love your explanation. Dementia certainly is a game changer in every situation. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to take our last little break, and we come back more from Elise November. Different like me. We'll be right back.
Not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back. I'm talking to Elise November of Different Like Me. Different Like Me provides counseling services, they provide therapy services, and one of the things that they also provide is something called cognitive rehabilitation. Elise, what is cognitive rehabilitation?
That's a good question. So what is cognitive rehabilitation? So when somebody has memory disorder and they're either in what we would call the mild cognitive impairment stage, which is kind of when somebody's newly diagnosed, moving into, I have to apologize. So if you hear beeping, my smoke alarm is, I think the battery is dying and somebody's probably out there trying to fix it right.
Yeah, I hope it's just a battery, it's not a fire.
Yeah,
if we see flames, I will understand.
I have a whole family out there who would be running in telling me, but if you hear a beep, that's what it is. So anyway, so going back, what is cognitive rehabilitation? Cognitive rehabilitation is, it's a, so I started to say when somebody has mild cognitive impairment, the beginning stages, the early Alzheimer's or early dementia, moving into the mid stages. So as the disease progresses, right, we lose connection in our brain, right? So the disease process starts to take over the brain, and different parts of the brain at different times, different rate for different people. And so as we lose ability, what happens is the cognitive rehab, it helps to create a connection with a healthy portion of the brain. So as the disease progresses, it starts to take over parts of the brain, and the brain starts to die, those parts of it, or not die, but not function. And so the cognitive rehab helps to create new connections. And how is it done? It's done by sitting with one of our speech therapists who does the cognitive rehabilitation, and they do these memory type of exercises or cognitive exercises, and some of them are memory related. So some of them are recall, some of them are more functional, so helping somebody to function better in their world. So in the beginning stages, people are still paying bills, organizing, driving, doing different things. So we help them with functional skills to be as independent as they can be. As somebody loses ability, we're trying to create connection. So it's like I call it the game of Mother May I, right? So it's like one step forward, two steps backwards. So what happens is if we're taking two steps backwards because of the disease process, the cognitive rehab helps you to take two steps forward. So it kind of tries to even out the a person's ability. So we're increasing connection in the brain. We're increasing the synapses, and they do that with like all of these different mind games and exercises that they utilize. And so it's truly amazing because I see people who are um, just really remaining stable and remaining very functional. They do their homework, they do whatever they have to do at home because we typically provide the services once a week. And they are just kind of holding their own, and it works. So if insurance pays for it, we know it works, and it's research based. So it is it is working. I wanted to go back to just like we were talking in the beginning, and I wrote down something. Um, uh, when we were talking about, sexual activity in the home or inappropriate sexual activity in the home, it doesn't always have to be sex. Actually having, sexual intercourse. It could also be things like just groping. It could be inappropriate exposure, to children, to adult children or to grandchildren. It could be inappropriate behavior in a supermarket. It could be inappropriate behavior with an aide. So it doesn't have to necessarily be that they're asking for sex all the time. It could take on many forms and it could look different. So I don't want it to just be that, this is the one thing that we're talking about, because the presentation is very different in everybody. But I just wanted to kind of clarify that. So.
No, I'm glad you did because that probably is more reason for people to be upset because it involves other people and, like you say, the exposure and doing things inappropriate. And those are very embarrassing to the family. And again, my question to you is, was somebody doing something like that? That could be like the beginning where we're finding out that someone maybe does have something going on wrong in the brain because they're what we call their filter of the things that keeps them from doing and saying things inappropriately. They've lost that filter. So that could be one of the first signs that something's really wrong with this person. Is that correct?
Yes, so that's right. They may lead with hypersexuality. And so that might be the initial presentation. In fact, I have, two cases where that was the lead. And one was when they, were inappropriately dating and on dating sites and dating somebody when their spouse was either out of town or out for the day, and would bring people into the home. And that behavior was never present prior to. And then the other thing is just a lot of inappropriate sexual comments to people. Inappropriate sexual talk could be out when you're just out with another couple, and somebody might say, "Oh, you're looking mighty sexy in that dress," and maybe get a little bit more explicit. And so you're saying, "Oh my God, who is this person that I'm married to? I've never seen you like this before." And so that might be a reason to say something's not right. And let me kind of talk to a professional. Let me talk to our doctor. Maybe there's something going on here, and that might be prompted, a reason that you might get tested. Um, so
And
sorry. I was
no,
going to
that's
say
okay. Go ahead, please.
there were so many issues that occur when somebody has a memory disorder, and dealing with the sexuality piece is very important, and like we talked about in the beginning, it's so important because it's such a taboo subject, and it's important for professionals to ask questions. What are you intimate? Just even asking that. Are you still sexually active? How are you intimate? Do you find any challenges? Because it's important to ask these questions because people are embarrassed. And as I started to say, this is just one of the issues that people deal with. There's so much to manage when you're caring for somebody with a memory disorder. So that's just one of the things among many that we help with.
Yeah, and especially want to let caregivers know, to be aware of things like this that can happen because it can come on just out of the blue. And don't scold the person. Don't argue with them. Don't yell at them. Don't scream at them because that's not going to help the situation. That is just going to escalate it because many times they have no control over it. They've lost their filter, so things are just going to happen. And I always say you can never win an argument with a person with dementia because you just have to get into their world and understand where they're coming from. So there are techniques and some of the things that we've talked about today, those techniques, those ways to distract, those ways to redirect somebody with dementia. You can learn those things from different like me and going for counseling and learning these types of things. So before we have to end our lovely conversation today, Elise, why don't you tell everybody how they can contact your company, especially now during this pandemic crisis. I'm sure there's a lot of people that are feeling some stressed out feelings and just feeling out of control, and maybe they need to talk to somebody. How can they do that?
Sure. So thank you. Yes, and I think anytime anybody needs to talk to somebody, it's always helpful to have somebody in your pocket. So they could call our office at 561-270-2280, 561-270-2280. We do have a skeleton staff in the office, so either Lou or Roseanne will answer your call. And I have a staff of about 40 therapists who work with patients. So it may be me or it may be one of my therapists, but we are all highly trained. Or visit our website at www.differentlikeme.com. And you can check us out there. You can message me. I'll get all the messages and we'll make sure you get taken care of. So we're here for you, even just to chat or just to talk or just to ask questions. We're here for you. If you don't want it to be like formal counseling, we'll help to direct you to where you need to go.
That's great. And I know you have lots of resources that you can help people with that. You have a great staff. I've been to your office and call Different Like Me if you need any kind of help with a situation that maybe you can't deal with, you can't talk to anybody else about. You need someone that can listen, who's a confidant, that is trained in listening. I know that a lot of people talk to their friends, but sometimes, like you said, friends aren't the best, and we need to vent. And if you need to vent and talk and get some help, give them a call. Thank you so much for being here today, Elise. I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I love teaching and educating, so this is a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, and good luck on your pursuit of your PhD, and let me know when we can call you doctor, and I look forward to that. And I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners today for tuning in. And don't forget, give yourself a hug. I know we're social distancing, we can't always get so close, but give yourself a hug and you'll feel good about it. So until next time, stay well, stay safe. And we'll see you next time on Caregiver Solutions Info Show. Take care for now.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions.
The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly those of its hosts, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station.